and welcome to another edition of the Hitting the Hardwood podcast, your home for all the latest Minnesota Lynx and WNBA news, analysis, and coverage. Thank you for tuning into another episode. I'm your host, Mitchell Hansen, and what a free agency it's been so far. What an offseason it's been so far in the WNBA. There's been movement all over the league. That includes the Minnesota Lynx with adding a trio of different players as well as training camp signings. There's been news about players re-signing, leaving Minnesota, and that's been true for all around the league. So it's been a really exciting start to the official signing period in free agency, which began February 1st. As teams continue to look to build their rosters ahead of the 2024 season, we still have obviously the WNBA draft coming up. So it will be a really interesting rest of the offseason, as it has been already so far. But it's been a lot of fun to follow as a fan and somebody who covers this league. It's been a lot of fun, as have been the last few off seasons. With that said, I'm really excited for the guest that we have on the podcast this week, Stephen PridGeon-Garner, who closely covers the Chicago Sky, as well as other NBA coverage and WNBA coverage that he does provide. He does a lot of great work. But it was really fun to kind of pick his brain and chat with him this week about those new signings that I just mentioned, those Lynx signings, notably Courtney Williams and Alanna Smith, the two biggest new pieces with this team that they added in free agency. It was a really great conversation to kind of dive into everything with him, what the Lynx fans and what WNBA fans can expect out of those two players, what they can bring to Minnesota, and everything in between. So it was a really great conversation with him, talking about everything WNBA, Minnesota Lynx, Chicago Sky related. So without further ado, let's jump right into the podcast with Stephen. Stephen, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well, Mitchell. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Thank you for joining me. This is the first. You're a podcast for you're the first time appearing on the podcast. So I appreciate you joining. Before we jump into things, if you could, people who are listening, they should be following your work already. You do a lot of great stuff. But if you could just kind of outline where they can find your work, where they can find you on social media and everything in between.
Yeah, my social media handle is at staytrue s.3 STAYTRUE and the number 3. Always talking basketball, always willing to talk basketball as long as you're trying to do so in a conducive manner and there's no trolling and all of that other stuff. If you're genuinely trying to learn or trying to just exchange or whatever the case may be, I'm always, always, always down to talk hoop. And also on my YouTube channel, it's my first name and then my last name. So Stephen, that's TPHEN, PridGeon, PridGeon-Garner, and the number 3. Always doing film sessions on the W as well as the NBA. And yeah, with the trade deadline coming up on the NBA side, if any of the teams that I cover have a trade going on, I'll likely be doing film sessions on those players, talking about how they fit, what might be a struggle, and things of that nature. And naturally, the same way with the W, with free agency coming along.
Absolutely. Yeah, kind of talking about free agency. It's been kind of wild. I mean, it's been just basketball world in general, NBA, WNBA. It's been wild right now with the trade deadline, all of that news, and then obviously the free agency news, the offseason news in the WNBA, which that's kind of the reason. One of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the podcast was you have a familiar tie with some of the new faces on the Lynx team, which we'll dive into that here in a little bit, but. Before we jump into that, I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on free agency so far, the offseason so far, not necessarily for the teams we're kind of more so involved with, but just the league in general. What are your thoughts on everything so far?
Honestly, man, I appreciate the fluidity of everything because over the last maybe 3 free agency periods now, we've seen player empowerment take more of a precedent where players are not feeling that they need to be attached or latched or locked in with the franchise just off of loyalty for obvious reasons on the business side because teams are always going to do what's in their best interest. And it seems like as the superstar players have become more vocal, CBA negotiations and all of those fun intricacies within everything are continuing to evolve. And now we're seeing players like Breanna Stewart, who spent the majority of her career in a winning fashion with the Seattle Storm, feel the liberty, no pun intended, to take her talents over to New York. And we've seen the same with a player like Jonquel Jones, and we just saw it most recently with Nneka Ogwumike,
Mm-hmm.
a longtime mainstay whose name is grown synonymous with the Los Angeles Sparks, feel more than comfortable with cutting her ties and taking her liberty in the free agency and ultimately making the decision that she feels is best for herself. And I think a lot of players are continuing to align themselves with that mindset. And I feel like it's only right. And it
Hmm.
really seems like the franchises that are investing intentionally and abundantly into the resources they have to present to players on their roster are starting to receive the players that they're in desire of with more frequency. That's how the Seattle Storm can pivot from the Sue Bird and Breanna Stewart era, only have one season in a quote unquote rebuild, and then they're able to retool and insulate new franchise player Jewel Lloyd with teammates the likes of Skylar Diggins Smith, teammates the
Hmm.
likes of Neko Ogwumike. And that's just kind of the space that we're in. You see the same thing with the Phoenix Mercury and things of that nature.
Hmm. Yeah, it's been, I would say probably even the last couple of years that's increased quite a bit. I mean, you look at, I think of Neko's longtime, teammate Candace Parker,
Yeah.
obviously her kind of jumping from team to team. A lot of times in the past, you've seen a lot of, I'm not saying they're not loyal now, but you've seen a lot of loyalty where they just stay with the same organization, where now it's more of kind of the NBA format, or kind of that mindset of, okay, we got to jump to try and take down the top teams in the league, or we got to team up and kind of try and win a championship. And that's the nice thing, or kind of the cool thing about the WNBA, is you can, organization wise, and from that standpoint, you can turn things around really fast. Like you said, Seattle, or Seattle, having a down year this year, and they will obviously improve, this upcoming season with just the moves that they've made already this offseason. So it's cool to see that, and it's not like you have a rebuild, a multi-year rebuild, or maybe a 3 4 5 year rebuild, like you maybe have seen in years past. So it's cool to see that fluctuation, and I think it's good for also the interest of the league, and people, monitoring what's going on, keeping that interest in seeing where players are going, people, kind of tapping in to see what's going on in free agency, when otherwise maybe it wasn't as, exciting as it was in past years. So that's fun as just a fan in general, seeing the change, because
Hmm.
that also keeps it kind of entertaining and exciting at the same time, and it makes, the WNBA has such a short span of the season that sometimes it gets forgotten in the off season, or it's kind of quiet in the off season, where now it's not the case, where it's a year round thing. And
Hmm.
that's great for the league. It's great for the exposure, and it's great for the growth of the league. And it
Hmm.
also speaks to the talent that's there too, and seeing the talent that's fluctuating and shifting around, and the amount of talent that is in this league, is continuing to grow and will continue to grow from here on out. So I do think I agree. It's been a lot of fun. It's we're only, with the official signing period, we're only, about a week or two in, but
Yeah.
it's still wild, and there's more to come, and it'll still be fun, and to kind of see how these rosters, round out through the off season leading up to the 2024 season. And then we have the draft. I mean, that's also
Yep.
going to be it's going to be an interesting draft this year,
Hmm.
with the talent that could come out, or, even if half the talent that does, potentially could come out, does come out, it's still going to be a good draft. So that'll be exciting as well. When it comes to the two teams that were a little, closely tied to, Minnesota and Chicago, what are your thoughts on, the off seasons that both of them have had? I mean, there's been kind of two different spectrums as far as change, with both organizations. What are your thoughts on what both teams were able to do so far?
Well, let's start with the Minnesota Lynx. I feel like they have improved the context around Nafisa Collier and Diamond Miller in a rather interesting way.
Hmm.
And I think you can start by looking at the guards that they've added to the room. And that's adding Letitia Heideman and Courtney Williams. The last time we saw those two players, Mitchell, can you remind myself and the audience where they were when on their final stage?
I don't. You got me stumped there. I don't know where.
They were in the finals.
Okay, okay, okay.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
were
All
in the
right, all right.
finals in 2022. Those
Okay, I
two
gotta brush
were
up on my facts here.
I caught you off guard on
You
that one.
did,
That's
you
on me.
did.
Yeah, so we saw those two spearheading on a team that was obviously led by Alyssa Thomas as well as DeWanna Bonner. We saw
Mhm.
those two spearheading a series comeback against the Chicago Sky. So where the Sky just couldn't find a guard outside of Rebecca Gardner that could stay in front of those two players.
Mhm.
Obviously, Kalia Copper and everyone else was dealing with the task of guarding players like DeWanna Bonner and Alyssa Thomas. But on the ancillary end, um, yeah, the Sky just couldn't find a way to stay in front of those two players, and they were consistently getting downhill, and they had a type of synergy about their play in tandem with each other that really helped to elevate the floor of the Connecticut Sun and then ultimately make the timely plays needed in scoring as well as facilitating around the context of obviously DeWanna Bonner and Alyssa Thomas to ultimately win that series in comeback fashion. And then play in a competitive nature with a team with obviously the most top end talents in the 2022 season being the Las Vegas Aces, who obviously also ultimately won the championship that season. So adding a championship caliber backcourt to a team that already has Nafisa Khalid, who's now going to be back for a full season and also fully in rotation. There's no ramp up period. She's just going to be where she is as a top five, top six player in the W. Adding players like that around the context that those two bring between her and Diamond Miller is going to be fun to see how those synergies all come together. And then you also add a piece like Alanna Smith, who's coming in. And I think that I don't think people really understood just how impactful of a player that she is. It's not always box score related. She does a lot of ancillary things on the margins that really just help to keep a team afloat to win the 50-50 ball, set good screens, be able to pop and play connector and things of that nature. It's all going to be really good seeing them in the context that Cheryl Reeve has with the team and the roster that she now has going into the 2024 season.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts about everything that the Minnesota Lynx have done?
I think that, the A top going into the offseason was the point guard position. What were they going to do with the point guard position? Were they going to go in the draft? Were they going to dip into free agency? Were they going to stick with what they had last year?
Mhm.
All of which would have been fine routes. I think that what they did was probably the best case scenario in adding depth. They now have that position kind of solidified and figured out for really the first time since Lindsay Whalen was, last played for the Lynx.
Mhm.
So that's important. And they also have some veteran presence there. That is a very key thing too, with that position specifically. I mean, you see it around, the game in general, whatever league you're talking about, having that veteran presence, that veteran guard, makes a difference. And not only did they add one of those, they added two of those. So I think that was a very key thing. And I'm with you with Alanna Smith. We'll talk a little bit about, the pairing of her and Courtney Williams here in a little bit, but the pair, those two, the chemistry they built last year with Chicago, being able to carry that over, I think will pay off and will be, a good pairing for this, this upcoming season for years to come for the Lynx. But the pieces they did add and kind of the realignment of this team, to
Mhm.
some regard. I mean, you talk about the additions, talk about the subtractions that they, kind of traded off in that, in those additions and those free agent signings or those trades. I mean, you look at Tiffany Mitchell, Rachel Banham,
Mhm.
and Lindsay Allen, they're all gone, but they bring in talent. They bring in maybe players that align them a little bit better. And they, the Tiffany Mitchell thing, I think Minnesota wanted that to work out where she could come in and play the guard. That didn't ultimately, end up working out. So, it's maybe best for both sides to kind of move on and give her a start or give her a chance to kind of, be in a position where she can use her skill set a little bit more, in
Yeah.
Connecticut. So
Mhm.
overall, I think it's a very strong offseason so far. Obviously it's, they still have more to add, when it comes to, the draft or depth wise with this team. I mean, you talk about like Jess Shepard and, Nina Milic are not going to be playing in 2024, so they lack a little bit of depth in the paint in the post. So that's something that maybe they could, either address yet this offseason or they could address in the draft, or via trade, whatever that may be. So I think, like I said, it aligns them a little bit better. It plays to the skill set of Nafisa Collier, in what she does well. And that's something that, Cheryl Reeve has talked about the last few off seasons, that they're focused on what Fee does well and build off of that and center everything around her. And she's at the center of everything, which she should be, because like you said, she's a top 5, 6 player in this league. So like I said, I'm a big fan of what they did, going into the offseason. I thought maybe Natasha Cloud would be an intriguing player to try and go out and sign.
Same.
Beyond that, I was a fan of Courtney Williams. I thought that she fit what Minnesota does really well. And then once Alanna Smith came over, I was even more convinced that I thought Minnesota should go out and get Courtney Williams. So seeing that happen, I'm a fan of it. I think it's a good, not necessarily a trade-off of either Natasha Cloud or Alanna Smith and Courtney Williams, but I think that that's maybe a better option as far as being able to add to this team and add to the depth of this team. So I think it's been a great offseason so far, and it also doesn't strap Minnesota down as far as overpaying
Yeah.
or kind of overspending
Mhm.
like they did a couple years ago. So that's a
Mhm.
good sign. But what are your thoughts on Chicago's offseason so far? It's been kind of an interesting offseason to see what obviously this team has made some additions, some major subtractions too. But what are your thoughts on what has happened and kind of maybe the direction of this organization right now?
Yeah, it has been needless to say, under extremely very, very, very underwhelming offseason for the
Hmm.
Chicago Sky. And especially with the rapid succession at which the dominoes are falling for this team, more and more not in the favor of contending or being a playoff team. And that's a tough pill to swallow when you add a coach that has the gravitas as a legend in the game of Teresa Weatherspoon. Now, obviously, she's going to be up to task in terms of putting her stamp on this team in a new era with a new identity. Even more so now with Kalia Copper being out of the picture. But that's a tough hand to be dealt, especially when you come into a situation expecting one thing, and if not one thing, expecting to have one piece available to,
Hmm.
kind of trek forward into your new era with, and then that piece is now gone. I think there's no better place to start with speaking on the Sky than to start with the front office and ownership, because they have not been up to task the last handful of seasons now, and those things continue to hamstring anything that a coach, James Wade, or now obviously Teresa Witherspoon might want to do in terms of the roster, because they don't have the optimized roster to facilitate to being able to compete with the arms race in terms of attracting free agents and keeping players even more than attracting free agents on your roster. You can't compete with what you can't compare to, and when your front office is not facilitating to the team the way that they need, like we talked about in the opening, with teams having a competitive advantage, they have either in the works, their own practice facilities and lockers and things of that nature for their players, versus the teams that don't. There's a
Hmm.
lot more teams in the league by the years that's passing that do or that have plans to do so versus the teams that don't. And when you're a team that doesn't, you just can't compare to that. And that's going to be an issue and a hurdle that comes up in contract negotiations when you speak to players that are potentially thinking about coming to your franchise. And I feel like that's a lot of what we saw over the past offseason,
Hmm.
which ultimately led to, after signing a contract extension through 2025 at the end of this past season, Kalia Copper ultimately decided to request a trade from the franchise. Again, a very tough pill to swallow, but when you look at the timeline and at the context of how things have happened over the last couple of seasons, the writing wasn't necessarily on the wall, but this couldn't be said to be completely out of the realm of possibility.
Hmm.
And now we look at a team that is, especially compared to what they looked like the last couple of seasons, stemming from the 2021 championship, looks like a shell of itself in that sense. And there's going to be a lot of newness in terms of the expectations applied to this team going into this new rendition. What have
Yeah.
been your kind of perspectives on everything that's been going on in Chicago?
It to me it almost seems so the moves are to me kind of puzzling, and you can tell they're trying to figure things out yet, which it's tough. I mean that players see that lack of kind of direction, that lack of vision, and that's the first and foremost thing that needs to happen is getting on the same page. That's why it is maybe good to kind of start fresh with a new coach, new front office, all of that kind of stuff, kind of get aligned in a vision, in a direction for this franchise. And then once
Mhm.
you can do that, players start seeing that, and you just kind of build from there. But it is going to take, it's going to take a little bit of time. I know fans don't want to hear it. It's tough to hear, but they're back to square one and trying to figure things out. And, that starts from the top all the way down. And like I said, it is just a little surprising, just kind of some of the moves that they've made and just kind of the roster that's assembled right now. Obviously, there could be more moves that come. They could figure other things out. But it is just to me as an outsider, it almost seems like there's just maybe a mix of direction or kind of a vision with this franchise, which they have to figure out. If you want to be successful, you have to be aligned and be on the same page in that regard. But it's been kind of interesting, I would say. But one player that they do have, which a lot of Lynx fans are familiar with, is Lindsey Allen. She stepped into the starting role this past season in Minnesota. She to some extent had kind of an up and down year. Obviously, health was a big issue with that. But what are your thoughts on what are on that signing, I guess, and we can kind of dive into her game a little bit too if you want to talk about that as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a common ground point to kind of piggyback off of going into what the Lynx had and what the Sky have now.
Mhm.
So I think she's the type of player that this team is needing going into everything that's after the era that they had Courtney Williams with, and even before Courtney having Courtney Vandersloot. So this team is kind of used to having some type of stability at the point guard position. Obviously, when you lose on Courtney Williams, and then you also lose on somebody like Natasha Cloud and Skylar Diggins-Smith, you have to find a piece of stability to pivot to just to get your offense into sets and actions in an efficient manner.
Mhm.
And Lindsey Allen is certainly a player that can do that and do that with relative ease, regardless of anything else that she might bring to the table. One thing she's going to do is get you into your offense efficiently and effectively. Just kind of looking at some of her film and then also looking at some of the games that I saw from her last season, the Minnesota Lynx were at their best last season, especially once she officially got to starting. After that first month and a half of the season, they were at their best when she was on the floor.
Mhm.
Outside of when Nafisa Collier was on the floor, she was the best piece for them to have. Just looking at the metrics and plus or minus and net rating and things of that nature. And I think the Minnesota Lynx kind of missed her in that latter stretch of the season when she got hurt, like you mentioned, and she didn't play in the playoffs last season either, as well,
Mm-mm.
right?
She had the
Yeah,
thumb injury at the end of the year.
correct. So I think in terms of them being competitive in that first round series, they also kind of missed just having, that stability, like I mentioned, at the point guard position. I think
Mhm.
that's something that she's gonna bring to the Sky. I'm curious to see how the competition for the starting role goes between her and Dana Evans. But it'll be fun to see how her impact as a veteran in the game, how she can help to potentially make Dana Evans a better basketball player just off of having that stability and having somebody that can give you so much of a breadth of knowledge that
Mhm.
you might not have had priorly. And I think all of that kind of long term looking at Dana Evans is going to play to her favor because she came into the league learning from Courtney Vandersloot in her prime. Then she
Mhm.
goes from Courtney Vandersloot to Courtney Williams. Then she goes from Courtney Williams to Lindsey Allen. That's a lot of very solid to all-time great level point guard play that you're learning from on a daily basis. And I think the long-term play there is going to be for Dana to take that knowledge and apply it to her game, make her more of a well-rounded point guard going into the future.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the nice thing with Lindsay Allen is she's just steady. You know what you're getting. She's
Yeah.
very that maybe she lacks a little consistency as far as, her deep ball game. Obviously being healthy is a big thing for her.
Mhm.
And I think she could work a little bit on her offensive game as well, just being more consistent in that area. But you know what you're getting. You're getting a floor general, you're getting a consistent guard. And that's ultimately what you want, whether she's going to be starting or coming off the bench. I think it's maybe even a little bit more important coming off the bench.
Mhm.
But she has that experience now. I mean that's nothing to to overlook. She has that starting experience if she needs to or when her number is called. She has that experience of playing both roles, coming off the bench and starting. So that's a valuable thing for a team like Chicago, who's kind of trying to search for what their roster needs to look like or get a feel for who they want with this organization moving forward. And she's still young. That's the other thing. So at the very least, it's worth taking a chance on her and seeing what you can get. It's not a high risk type of decision, and it could end up being a high reward type of move.
Yeah.
So it's something before the Natisha Heidemann thing, or Natisha Heidemann trade to Minnesota, I was in favor of Minnesota trying to re-sign Lindsey Allen to come off the bench. I don't know if there was interest in there, if Lindsey Allen wanted to kind of start somewhere fresh and maybe get a bigger role somewhere else. And I that maybe she found that in Chicago. It's I think it'll be a nice addition for this guy, and she's also just a player that'll go out there and she grinds. She just gets the job done, and like you said, she was a very stable guard for Minnesota last year and in a season and kind of on a team that was searching for that. So that's something that's valuable that I think she'll provide to Chicago. But let's backtrack a little bit. I kind of wanted to pick your brain a little bit too on Courtney Williams and Alanna Smith. Obviously, they played together last year with Chicago, but what do you think? Or I guess what do you think fans should expect out of both of them in their first year in Minnesota this summer?
So I think a lot like James Wade led teams with Chicago Sky fans and people who watch the W know a lot about. I think there's a lot of similarities between his approach to the game and the kind of the blue collar identity that his teams typically have that could also be said for Cheryl Reeves and her teams. And I think a player like Courtney Williams, she's kind of like she's like a X Factor wild card type of player, where she brings a change of pace to things. For a coach that I'm not gonna say is like militant, but she's very much she demands a lot out of her players, not unlike James Wade did.
Mhm.
I think Courtney bridges that gap and brings some fun and some more personality and a different type of flavor to teams. Now, that obviously has to be catered to in an appropriate manner, but I feel like if done so, and obviously there's a abundance of leadership with the Minnesota Lynx organization, so I don't see it being an issue. I think it can play to your favor. Not unlike we've seen in two stints with her going to from and then back to Connecticut as well under Kurt Miller. That's a franchise that has a certain mystique about it, not unlike the Minnesota Lynx do. And I think Courtney can add to the culture and make it a little bit more bridge that gap between kind of some of the older heads on the team and the younger players like Diamond Miller. And just like I said, making things more fun. But in addition to that, being one of the best players in pick and roll and for the Minnesota Lynx to have that, which Lindsey Allen also brought the pick and roll effectiveness. But I think the dual threat of Courtney being a playmaker for herself, but also for others, and being able to operate in that mid range area of the floor consistently is going to be something that is fun to track, seeing her have a pick and roll partner like Nafisa Collier. I think especially when you get to what Courtney Williams did with the Chicago Sky last season. We'll get to her talking about her partnership with Alanna Smith and Elizabeth Williams. But what she can do with Nafisa and making things a little bit easier in empty corner pick and rolls, empty side pick and rolls, is going to be just a different type of dynamic that this team just hasn't had, like you said, since Lindsey Whalen was down in the position. And Courtney being able to just have that type of synergy with multiple pieces on the roster is going to be extremely impactful. What are your kind of thoughts on what Courtney Williams can bring to this team and what you think she can change for this team?
I do agree with you that her playmaking ability I think is different than what Minnesota has had. Even you could even argue with Lindsey Whalen. Now Lindsey Whalen was the kind of player that could take games over if she needed to for
Hmm.
herself.
Hmm.
But she wasn't somebody that needed to score or was the primary scorer on the offense or within the offense. And I think that's very similar to Courtney Williams. She's able to she's able to do multiple things. She's able to facilitate. She's able to she can crash the boards if she needs to,
Yes.
which
Yep.
is big for that that guard position. She can also take games over if other players are struggling. And
Hmm.
that's something that Cheryl Reeve has talked about this team needing. They need that third option. They need somebody beyond Kayla McBride and Nafisa Collier. I think that Diamond Miller hopefully will kind of emerge into that third option.
Hmm.
eventually, either this season or as her career progresses. But right now, that's Courtney Williams, and that's a great addition to have. That's something that Minnesota didn't even have with Lindsey Allen, or not consistently with Lindsey Allen, I should say. But
Hmm.
yeah, I think her. She's a very Courtney Williams is a very Cheryl Reeve type point guard. She's kind of like a Lindsay Whalen to some regard. Like she's a grinder. She'll go dive on the floor. She'll be running all over the place. She's that kind of player. And she's that high energy, that personality that I think will resonate well with this team and the fan base. And I'm just, like I said, I'm a big fan of her addition to this team and what she can bring, as well as you even think about Natisha Heideman coming off the bench. That's a great pairing, I think, with
Hmm.
those two. But what do you think about you talked a little bit about Alanna Smith and what she could bring, but what do you think she provides this team with? She kind of seems like she has a lot of upside and she's still young. She kind of just broke onto the scene last year, but what do you think that she could bring alongside Courtney Williams with this team?
I think it was a very timely signing by Cheryl Reeves and company, just because the fact that Jessica Shepard is not going to be with the team
Mhm.
because of is it prioritization, correct?
She will be overseas, and yeah, prioritization. She won't be here back in time, so she's sitting out the year.
So having a player like Alanna Smith to be in place of that, which Jessica Shepard brought to your team, obviously helped in abundance. That's a major, major, major signing,
Hmm.
and I think Atlanta is the type of player that, in a unique manner from how Courtney Williams would benefit from the context that the Lynx provide. I think they both add to it, and for Atlanta, it's all of the ancillary things. You talked about grabbing 50-50 balls and diving on the floor. That's Courtney Williams, but that's also very much Alanna Smith as well. She's just the type of player that she can toggle through multiple different hats over the course of 40 minutes. And she can be a secondary scorer in the lineups depending on how you decide to structure them. She can be your main screener and be able to not just play off of the pop and play off of 3-point attempts. She can catch those and play off the attack. She can also get into post play a little bit. She can make on a short roll a little bit, and she's just kind of a jack of all trades, or a Swiss Army knife, if you will.
Hmm.
And all of those things that I speak to on the offensive end also translate even more so to the defensive end, where I feel like her impact is most felt. She's the type of player that brings a different type of level of scheme versatility, as well as lineup versatility to unlock for your team. I think she can play next to any of the Lynx front court pieces, and you can expect to get positive play from the defensive side of the ball. She can switch out on guards and guard a yard and contain the ball without necessarily needing a double team to come. She can guard in the post. She can guard and pick and roll, hedging out, flatten out. She can play drop coverage and do it effectively. She's just such a good piece that brings so many different dynamics to the team. And like I mentioned, in place of Jessica Shepard, you really can't do much better in terms of what was available on the market at an attainable price. So
Hmm.
I think they hit that one out of the park. That was a home run hit for Cheryl Reeve and company, and I think they're going to see great benefits from having her
Hmm.
next to Nafisa or Uhas.
Right. And that's one thing that we've seen with this Lynx team over the last few years is having those versatile pieces, having those
Hmm.
players that can play multiple positions,
Hmm.
not necessarily have the traditional looking lineup where you have a small guard and a big post like they had with let's say Sylvia Fowles when she was in Minnesota before she retired.
Hmm.
Right now they have a very versatile lineup. They have players that can play anywhere really, and not saying that the guards would play in the post, but they can switch between a couple different guard positions,
Yep.
and the same way goes for the post in the paint. But yeah, that's one thing that's really intriguing about this lineup, and one thing that Minnesota has kind of shifted over the last year or two is kind of suiting Nafisa Collier's style of play in that they want to run the floor, push the pace and kind of increase that pace.
Hmm.
And that's something that all of these moves have that in mind.
Hmm.
And I think that will it'll only build on to Nafisa Collier's MVP caliber season that she had last year. And I think it'll end up benefiting this team in the long run. But I agree with you. I really do like those two moves. And and not that I was a fan of them pulling away from your sky, but
Yeah.
I am a fan of them being in Minnesota, and I think that they're very nice additions, as well as the other additions that Minnesota did make this offseason so far.
For sure.
When it comes to kind of the let's start. I know it's still early and we still have a lot to figure out in the draft. Obviously, we still have a lot to figure out in training camp and so on,
Mhm.
as far as final rosters. But what are your predictions on these two teams? Where do you think that they'll maybe kind of land in the standings this year?
Well, given we can start with the Lynx. Given the fact that, like I mentioned, the Courtney Williams and Alanna Smith being applied and added to the context of the Lynx, but also just what they bring to the table in addition to what's already been there. I think it's a hand in glove type of fit. Talk about Courtney Williams,
Hmm.
player that shot 50% on catch and shoots from deep last season. Obviously, it remains to be seen if that's something that translates and sustains for her. But that was like, I think for like 100 something players that had 112 plus possessions, doing so was the best. Um, if she can bring even like three-fourths of that to playing around Fiza Collier and the gravity that she has and the extra attention that she's always going to garner, in addition to playing in pick and roll and having the ball in her hands with Nafisa, that's going to be something that teams have to figure out how to deal with. If you switch it, Nafisa has post ups galore, and she's one of the best post playmakers and isolation playmakers in the WNBA. There's just so many different layers that come with adding the dynamic pieces that they did. I don't see why the Minnesota Lynx can't potentially have a top five seed.
Hmm.
And if they get off to a hot start, I can see them even pushing top four. Obviously, that there's a lot going on with the top end in terms of contending teams in the W, but I do feel like with Cheryl Reeves on the sideline and just the growth of Diamond Miller being added to the mix in addition to the players that they've added, having Letitia Heidemann as well. I think that can be something that just really kind of catches some people off guard because their moves weren't as loud as the moves that other teams made. And if they set themselves up position wise to where their ranking in terms of going into the playoffs is optimized, I can see them ended up in the second round or even potentially in the conference finals.
Hmm.
Now,
Yeah.
obviously, the work has to be done, but I think the pieces and the way they have their things aligned and the brain trust that they have to command those groups is it's just something that most teams don't have, and that's going to be a competitive advantage for them.
Hmm.
And just one more quick thing with Natisha, I think that last season she struggled with the Connecticut Sun because there was just too much demand placed upon her to now her being in a situation where, again, like I mentioned in the opening, she's back with Courtney Williams. That takes so much off the table for her where she can just play and be herself. And I think that liberation that comes from that, in addition to, like you said, coming in potentially a six player role, all of that in terms of and also being in a new situation, that might just be all she needed to get her to be a 14-point scorer off the bench and potentially be a six player of the year candidate, in addition to everything else that the Lynx have added. So I think
Hmm.
it's gonna be a fun season for this team.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on where the Lynx might be and if we can get to the sky after that?
I agree. I do think that, I don't want to say that this team will surprise people because,
Hmm.
they're a talented team. They finished, where they were a playoff team last year and they pushed Connecticut to, 3 games in the opening round. So that they
Hmm.
have talent there. But
Hmm.
I do agree that I think that they maybe take a little bit of a next step. They do move into a top five team. I could even see them in top four.
Hmm.
It's interesting the moves that like Phoenix made and
Yeah.
in Seattle as well. We'll see how those pieces mesh and how that results in them rising up the standings or whatever that may be. But I would agree that I think this is a top five team.
Hmm.
I think that they could like you said, reach at least second round. I think that's very doable, depending on how all the pieces mesh, how that third option that I talked about earlier, how that goes into effect, how multidimensional they end up becoming.
Hmm.
And yeah, so I think that they definitely made moves that improve them this offseason. And you look at how they finished last year. If you talk about improvement, what moving up one or two more spots in the standings, I think is very doable. So I definitely agree that they're in my eyes a top five team, and I think that they maybe even could surprise and move up, maybe rise up a little bit throughout the year, even higher than that. But how about the Sky on the other side of things? What are your thoughts on the Sky and what they might be able to do this year?
I think everything is going to be contingent upon what they do or what they're able to do with the third pick in this upcoming draft, by way of Phoenix in that trade for Kalia Copper. I think if they can find a piece, and obviously it's hard to gauge who's going to come out of the draft and who might ultimately be available at this current moment in time. But if they could add a player like Cameron Brink to their roster to go into this new rendition and this new era for the franchise, I think that would help a ton. Obviously, there's other players that are available in the that should be available in the draft, but I just think they can pivot quickly. It doesn't have to be um, as doomsday as it kind of feels and seems, because it's such a contrast to what we've expected from this franchise the last couple of seasons. But they're not, they won't, I don't think they'll be in the playoffs this season. I think they can still remain competitive and just come up short off of a talent discrepancy with many teams. And I do expect for them to be an extremely scrappy and competitive team, um, kind of falling in alignment with what everything that Teresa Weatherspoon is. But it's just going to be an uphill battle in terms of them compiling enough wins to get back into the playoffs like they did last season. So I think they will come up short of that, but I don't think it will be a lost season in terms of them taking steps, identifying things that they need to then go forward into the 2025 season and after that, and potentially set themselves up for more success incrementally coming from everything that's come from this offseason now. So
Mhm. Yeah.
it feels like doomsday, but it's definitely the bottom point for this team, but they're not going to be there for as long as I think it seems.
Right. And the draft does fix a lot of things. If you get a talent like Cambrick that, that'll obviously help, kind of
Mhm.
jumpstart or kickstart this rebuild. But
Mhm.
it is just tough with how star heavy the W is and how top heavy it is right now.
Mhm.
With the limited amount of teams. I mean, you only have 12 teams and you look at least six or seven teams and the kind of star power that they have, that only leaves one or two spots available. So it'll be tough, I think, for Chicago. I do agree that unfortunately I think they might be one of the teams on the outside looking in when it comes to the playoffs. But like we just said, it doesn't take long to turn things around in this league. And once you get that direction figured out, I think that it'll only continue to rise up from there. But everybody goes through it. You got to go through the down years after you go through the up years, and it's kind of a roller coaster ride. And then now it's just Chicago's turn. I mean, Minnesota went through that a couple years ago, or even a year or two ago, and it happens to everybody. So now it's just ultimately Chicago's turn to kind of go through those bumps and through those hurdles and to ultimately get back to the top. And it's also a kind of a good time. You don't want to say it's a good time to go through a rebuild, but it is kind of a good time to go through this right now because you look at
Mhm.
Chicago might be on the upswing or on the uptick, and those other teams. You look at the top two teams in the league, Las Vegas and New York. Maybe they're coming down from their super teams at that time. So it could work out well for Chicago if they stick to the plan and stick to their vision, stick to their goal, and ultimately build this team. But so, well, cool. Stephen, that's really that's all I had. It was a lot of great stuff, a lot of great insight. I really appreciate you giving a kind of a peek behind the curtain of these new players and what they could bring to Minnesota. I think a lot of fans are excited about what these new players and what this new team can look like. And everything that you provided was good insight to kind of give an idea of what their games are like when players or if they're not familiar with who they are and what they can bring to a team. So I appreciate you joining, and we'll definitely have to do this again soon. We'll maybe something during the season we'll have to check back in and see how everything is and see how things are going with both teams. So I really do appreciate you joining.
I appreciate the opportunity, and I'm glad I could share and also receive information that I might not have known priorly. It's definitely a great conversation.
Yes, absolutely. We'll talk soon.
All right, talk soon. Thanks.
Thank you once again to Stephen for joining the podcast this week. As I mentioned, it was a great conversation with him. He offered a lot of insight and kind of a behind the scenes look at what fans can expect out of Courtney Williams and Alanna Smith specifically. as well as, we talked a little bit about, just kind of the pieces that have been shifting between these two teams, it seems like, this offseason, and, some former Minnesota Lynx players going over to the Chicago Sky and vice versa. So it was great to chat with Stephen. Really appreciate him. We'll definitely have to have him on the podcast again sometime soon. He's as you can tell, he's very knowledgeable about the game, about the league, and it was a really great conversation. So appreciate Stephen for joining the podcast. Also want to give a shout out to Jeremy Rushing for producing this podcast every week, doing the great work on the back end to make sure this podcast gets out in a timely fashion. Makes me sound like I'm less crazy than I actually am. And I appreciate everything that Jeremy does for this podcast in helping, making sure that Hitting the Hardwood gets on the airwaves to all of you every edition, every week throughout the year, and as we continue on in this off season as well. I also want to, if you're looking for more coverage on the Lynx, as you hear in this podcast, please go check out our Patreon page at Hitting the Hardwood, or patreon.com/Hitting the Hardwood. There's you'll get all of the breaking news, all of the news surrounding the Lynx this off season. And everything from bonus coverage to discounts at our Hitting the Hardwood store, everything that you could want, and then some. I share a lot of information that I don't share elsewhere on our Patreon page. So please go check that out. Consider starting a free trial. Consider if you're willing and able, please sign up for a membership. I promise that it'll be worth it, and I welcome feedback to everything that we do on there. If there's something that our patrons aren't receiving that they want to start receiving, please reach out. You can always email us at hittingthehardwood@gmail.com. And that goes for anything with this podcast, any suggestions, feedback that you may have. Please reach out to us and let us know. Also, I want to give a shout out to our two partners who have been with Hitting the Hardwood here since day one. That being Better Edge and Homage. Let's start with Better Edge. Our friends at Better Edge, they do, it's one of my favorite betting apps, if not my favorite betting app that I use. You can use it anywhere you'd like. It's a Minneapolis-based company. Those of you who are in Minnesota, you understand the kind of the inability to bet on a lot of sports right now. Better Edge allows you that ability to do that. You can bet against your friends. You can bet against in competitions. You can do pick'ems. You can do anything you want on the WNBA, the NBA, the basketball. Any sport you can think of. You can bet. And play and win some money in Better Edge. So go check out betteredge.com. bettor.edge.com. If you're a first-time user, go to betteredge.com/links. Use the promo code LYNX, LYNX. And like I said, if you're a first-time user, you get $20 in free play when you go to that link and you sign up and create an account. So go check that out. Give it a try. See how you like it. You'll be hooked. I guarantee it. I am. I use it regularly. Throughout the WNBA season, I'm a little bit more active. I'll do some competitions. You can come take my money. But it's all good fun, and you should really go check out Better Edge. It's a great company, great people there. And it's a really user-friendly platform, and I really do enjoy it myself. Second one is Homage. Homage does a lot of great vintage clothing, a lot of modern clothing. You can find everything and more at Homage, HOMAGE.com. If you visit our website, our social media platforms, you'll find two specialty links, one for Minnesota Lynx gear, one for WNBA gear. If you click on that and you purchase something through those links, you benefit or a portion of those proceeds or of the purchase. It doesn't cost you anything more, but a percentage of those comes back to support Hitting the Hardwood. So I appreciate anything you can do. There's a lot of great WNBA gear, specifically talking about the WNBA on Homage or on Homage's website. Me personally, you hear me talk about it on here all the time. I have the Timberwolves. You can get Timberwolves gear, but I have the Lynx hoodie, I have the Lynx t-shirt, and I have the WNBA charcoal t-shirt, which are three of my favorite things. I'm actually wearing the Lynx t-shirt right now, so it's one of my favorite clothing items that I have, as well as what we have at the Hitting Hardwood store, I must admit. But please go check out Homage, HOMAGE.com. A lot of great gear, a lot of, like I said, vintage gear. They have some old logo t-shirts and different vintage gear, as well as the modern gear with the logos of every WNBA team and other sports leagues that you could want. With that said, I really appreciate you tuning into another episode of Hitting the Hardwood. As the offseason continues, we'll continue to do these periodically. I'll pick this podcast up as the WNBA season starts, which is right around the corner. It'll come here before we know it. But enjoy the rest of the offseason. Enjoy the free agency madness that has begun and will continue to happen. enjoy March Madness coming up. We'll check in before then, but enjoy March Madness. Keep an eye on those college prospects and who the Lynx could potentially target with that number 7 pick if they hold or if they continue to hold that draft pick leading up to the draft. But there's a lot of exciting prospects coming out, and leading up to the draft, it'll be exciting to see what all happens, who comes out and declares for the draft, and ultimately what that pool looks like as we continue to build out the rosters and inch closer to training camp and the start of the 2024 season. So once again, thank you all for tuning in, and I will catch you all on the next episode.